All right, we're going to get to our guests here. Adam Schuster joins us as a senior budget and tax research director at Illinois Policy Institute. And, the state of Illinois, fiscally without COVID, disaster, dumpster fire, enter in global pandemic, and it gets very grim very quickly. We've been talking about this on my show since I've been behind a microphone. You add in this pandemic and it becomes much more significantly severe. Governor Pritzker has now come out, and he's starting to throw out some words that are going to frighten some people, which is why he's using them, because this is politics. And guess whose fault all of this is? Of course it is Donald Trump's fault. Adam, what is the governor saying? He's all of a sudden we're talking about spending cuts, budget cuts. We should have been talking about budget cuts before we were talking about a progressive income tax, if you ask me. But what's the story here? What is Governor Pritzker threatening the taxpayers of Illinois with right now?
So essentially, he is threatening the taxpayers that if the Donald Trump administration does not come through with the $5 billion blank check bailout that he wants, that he's going to order state agencies to cut spending across the board by 5% this year and up to 10% next year. So he's threatening these massive cuts to sort of core government services, the types of services people want and need. And remember, while Illinois is a very high spending state overall, most of what we spend money on is actually pensions and debt service. And when it comes to services and agencies, we actually have been seeing pensions crowd out that spending, so that spending has fallen over time, and we're not a high spending state on services that actually go to the people. And so Pritzker is presenting this false choice between bailouts and these spending cuts, but we're in this situation because of the budget he passed last May that increased spending by more than $2 billion, despite the fact that he knew we were going to see declining revenues.
Does that increased spending include the pay raise that the legislature didn't take out, that they accepted in the budget?
Yes, it includes pay raises, automatic pay raises, including the pay raises for state workers that Governor Pritzker refused to delay or cancel or try to negotiate his way out of, the way that many other governors did, even in Democratic states.
That these local, Democratic state reps like Katie Stewart did not vote against. Monica Brista, I believe, didn't vote against it either, voting for these increases in their own pay. And now Pritzker comes out and he's all big and bad on his spending cuts. Ryan, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, Adam, do you think this, based on what we've seen from Pritzker so far, is this an empty threat? I mean, is he trying to jockey to get federal money here, or do you think he'll actually pass, assuming with Congress, would pass spending cuts?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. The governor's used this trick before. If you think back all the way to January, I know it seems like forever ago, the governor was making essentially this same threat with regard to the progressive income tax. He was presenting voters with a false choice. He said, if you don't enact my tax hike, I'm going to have to cut, core spending across the board by 5%. So I do think that, because he increased spending this year, because he refused to do anything to reform pensions or any of the other structural cost drivers of our budget, there likely will have to be changes to the budget that they passed in May if the federal government doesn't come through. Now, I do think he is trying to present a worst case scenario for the purpose of applying political pressure to the Trump administration.
I don't know if we lost Annie or what happened, but Adam, I'll just continue on until we get her back here. Illinois being, in a worse position than other states, is Pritzker, is this something that we're seeing that he is lining up with other Democrat governors to try to pressure Washington to get? Or is this a unique situation to Illinois?
Again, it's a little bit of both. So I think, Illinois is probably in the worst fiscal situation here, both before and after COVID. But a number of other Democratic governors, including in New York and a handful of other states, are pushing for this federal bailout. And, the challenge here is it's not completely wrong that you would expect the federal government to provide some help to state and local governments. And they've already done that to a significant degree. They've passed $360 billion in aid to state and local governments. More than $11 billion of that went to Illinois. But now they're asking for something different. They're asking to help with general budget holes, not spending related to the pandemic, not healthcare costs and the like, but just plugging their general budget holes. And so if Congress is going to do that, if Congress thinks that that's a valid thing for them to do, it shouldn't come without strings attached, which has been our position. If Congress is going to help these state and local governments with problems that long predate COVID-19, it needs to be contingent on them fixing those problems before they get the money.
We're talking with Adam Schuster, Senior Budget and Tax Research Director at Illinois Policy. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Adam. How tied to COVID is this in reality? Because we know that they're going to say, well, we need money because of the pandemic. And I'm sure that shutting businesses down is not helping with tax revenue. But how much would you say that this is related to needing money because of the pandemic?
Well, so there's two kinds of buckets you could break the pandemic relief into. One would be sort of disaster relief, right? The same type of spending that you'd expect if there's a tornado or an earthquake or some type of natural disaster. And Congress has done a lot of that. They continue to do a lot of that spending on, increased spending on Medicaid, increased assistance to hospitals. And then there's, revenue losses. And essentially what Governor Pritzker is asking for is to make up the revenue losses. Now, that's an economic problem. It is related to COVID-19. But had he, enacted a responsible budget in May where they, brought spending in line with their revenues, and had they, had some emergency savings like most other states do in a rainy day fund, they'd be able to get through this without asking for a bailout. So while all states are experiencing, drops in revenue, many of them are able to handle that. Arizona, for example, they went into this with a massive rainy day fund of almost 10% of their annual budget held in reserve, and they also had budget surpluses. And so as a result, they were able to absorb a 15% drop in revenue without having to cut spending. Illinois had nothing saved, and the idea of this state having a surplus is a joke. Instead, we've got billions of dollars in deficits and debt.
Yeah, Adam, as we're trying to reconnect with Annie here, I got one more question for you before we hit the break. Is the governor trying to tie this to the progressive income or the fair tax yet? I mean, is that part of the conversation, is saying, well, we're going to take away spending on roads and infrastructure and things if you don't pass this tax for us in November?
Yes, he's done that. He's using both the bailout, the phantom bailout that hasn't actually come yet, and the revenue that voters haven't approved yet from the progressive income tax. Both are included in his budget. So without those, the budget he passed has about a $6 billion deficit. But again, that's irresponsible planning on his part. And to the extent that Illinois is grappling with a crisis that is worse than other states, it's because of decisions made by people like Governor Pritzker.
Adam Schuster, thanks for joining us, Senior Budget and Tax Director at Illinois Policy. We appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
IllinoisPolicy.org if you want to look up more about that organization and the different plans that they have that sometimes get overlooked that actually could solve problems.